You can be the most highly skilled, qualified, 10 degrees, but you're not a good teacher. The minute you're just grabbing each month the same lesson that you do every year, and the papers are getting crumbly and brown, and to pull yourself out of your comfort zone.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Inspiring Educators. We have an inspirational school leader here with us today. I've met Brent a couple of times, actually more than a couple of times, and every single time I meet him, I'll leave the meeting inspired and more inspired. Let me formally introduce our guest today. His full name is Mr. Brent Marquez Valente.
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
The best part, Marquez is the name that he took. Then he got married from his wife. So it's Brent. It used to be Brent Valenti and then became Brent Marquez Valenti after he got married. Brent, is that right?
That's correct.
And there are so many more nuggets of, inspiration, of amazing stories that I've had in my conversations with Brent. But before we go any further, Brent, I'll request you if you could introduce yourself
Sure.
and let the audiences know about you, your journey, how did you start, and how did you finally become the Assistant Superintendent HR at Jefferson Elementary School District.
I would love to. Well, thank you for having me today, Rishabh. Well, as you heard, my name is Brent Marquez Valente. I'm currently the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources for the Jefferson Elementary School District in Daly City. In a week, I'll be concluding my 26th year in the school district, 10 years in this capacity. But I started my journey in an unlikely manner, teaching in San Francisco Unified School District. I had studied actually international relations at the San Francisco State University. However, like many graduates of university, I continued to wait tables and looked for what it was I wanted to do with my life. Diplomacy, which was something I initially thought would be the pathway I was going to take, ended up being something I wasn't interested in. So, but for the bottom line was I had a customer at my restaurant. She was a teacher on Treasure Island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, which at the time was a naval base. And so her job was teaching all of the Navy brats, as we call them, at the school, as well as students that came out. They were bussed out to the island. And she says, Brent, you'd be a very good teacher. And I said, well, yeah, I never really thought of that. I said, what makes you think that? And she said, well, you've got a good personality, number one. And I said, well, thank you. The second thing is being a waiter is very much like being a teacher. You have little groups of people. Everybody needs something different. Everybody's demanding your attention. Some people, when you give them your attention, are fine. Others just want more coffee and want to chit chat. And, they're very transferable skills. Now, mind you, I hadn't stepped foot in a college preparation class. And so I did a visit to her school out on Treasure Island. And I clicked. And the woman that was the principal at the time at her school wanted to hire me as a paraprofessional. So I'm like, what's a paraprofessional? And so she told me, hey, go down to San Francisco Unified and fill out an application. And I said, sure. And so a few days later, I went down there and basically gave them the information. She said, why do you want to be a paraprofessional? You have a degree, you speak Spanish, you should be a substitute teacher. And I said, okay, what is that? How does that work? And she told me how, and I applied for what is called an emergency credential. Here in California, you need what's called a 30-day emergency credential to be a day-to-day substitute. So I said, well, let's do that. So I followed that path and started taking substitute jobs, picking up the phone at 5:30 in the morning at the time. So I was given a position, just a substitute position at what's called Star King Elementary School on Potrero Hill. Did that for a few days. And then I went down, got a job down at Bryant Elementary. It was a Spanish bilingual class, 3rd and 4th grade. The class had already 6 substitutes that year. So it was December 1994. And I got in, and, week 2, week 3, then they said, "Hey, Brent, how'd you like to stay for the rest of the year?" "Yeah, sure."
Okay.
So I went and, applied for the university, went back to San Francisco State, got a longer type of an emergency credential, which is called a multiple subject emergency credential, and returned to school and was hired in my first job mid-year. Worked at Bryant for a couple of years, worked at another school in the district called Monroe, finished my credential program after 3 years. And as things came to be, I was introduced to the Jefferson Elementary School District. And at that time, they were paying significantly more than San Francisco was. So I went from my $28,000 a year teaching job to my $40,000 a year teaching.
Wow.
I was
Wow.
like, whoa, I remember when my dad was just making 30, and whoa. So I got hired to teach fourth grade, and I taught fourth grade at John F. Kennedy for 4 years. And just towards the end of my fourth year, I was already doing some leadership stuff at the school. I mean, little things like I was the guy that had the key to come in on the weekends. I would help out in the parking lot every day. I would help. So, taking initiative, nothing, incredible. And so they needed some help at one of our middle schools. They were having some issues. The administrative team was not really clicking. And they just needed an extra pair of eyes, an extra pair of hands on campus. And it was right around the corner.
Wow.
And sure enough, they came to me and they said, "Brent, would you like to be what's called a teacher on special assignment?" I'm like, "What is that?" you know? And sure enough, it was sort of a quasi-administrative role. I wasn't in a classroom. I had to get my first slacks and tie. And it was like, I went shopping. I was very excited.
Yeah.
And did that from April of 2002 to the end of the year. And then the next year I was hired as a dean, or excuse me, a vice principal. Went back to school, got my
Oh,
administrative credential, worked as a vice principal for 5 years and then a principal for 9. And at the end of that
wow.
time, I had spent many years on the negotiation team, was always involved with labor relations. And when my predecessor was ready to retire, I threw my hat in the ring, and I was hired in April of 2015 as the assistant superintendent. So
Wow.
many of my opportunities took place here in the Jefferson Elementary School District, but I've always found that when opportunity presented itself, I was willing to throw my hat in the ring and take advantage of it.
Yeah.
There were some things that didn't work out in 2020 hindsight. That's okay. It's a beautiful school district, wonderful students, great community. And I've been fortunate to have really good colleagues and supervisors that have been able to support me. And that's sort of what
Wow.
led us to where we are today.
That's an amazing journey. And what stood out for me was
What's that?
what started as a by chance experience
Hmm.
became a full-fledged journey where you've actually experienced every single milestone. So you didn't
Yep.
just really, you go to university and got your credential, become a teacher, then one fine day
Yep.
suddenly thought, let me, go do the next credential and then directly apply for a principal and then directly apply for an administrative role.
Hmm.
But you actually went in, started from the smallest, the startest, not the smallest, but the minutest
Yeah.
initiation point, exploded and always kept an open mind of what else can I add to my community. And that
Yeah.
kind of led to snowballing of the role and slowly reaching where you are today.
Yeah.
Super inspiring.
Absolutely. It's funny because, as I complete my 10th year in this current position, which is the longest I've been in any single position, I look towards my future too. I'm
Yeah.
looking to what is the next opportunity to present itself. But also I need to be intentional about what it is I want to do with myself.
Yeah.
I've this is my 30th year in the business. Still a young guy. Got
30
things
years
to
young.
contribute. Yeah, 30 years young. Um, but the one thing about education I think is very important and I think has been valuable for me is there's just so many aspects to education
Yeah,
outside of just being a teacher or just being a paraprofessional or in my case being a district administrator. There's
yeah,
so many ways to contribute. And the best part about this job, and I say this not just for the podcast or the people, it's the kids.
it's the
The
kids.
kids are so sweet. They're so willing to kind of work with you, even if it's tough. That kids want to know where the line is.
Yeah,
Sometimes they don't want to deal with the adult, but they're watching to see if the adult's there. And it was always so nice and restorative when kids dealing with students and their families.
yeah.
And I miss that. I got to say that's something I need to be better about, getting out to the schools and being around the kids because I'm good with them and I think they connect with me and it's always so important to keep what's in the best interest of the students
Oh,
and their
absolutely.
families at the forefront because they're our customers.
Yeah.
They're who we're here for, and it's very good to have something like that to tether yourself to.
I'll share something with you. It's so beautiful that you mentioned about kids being the core because I've met so many administrative leaders, school leaders around the world, not
Mhm.
just the US. And many times people start thinking about their role as the key focus versus what is the importance of that role for the kids' lives. And I
Yeah,
think that's where I've seen the major difference coming in. And let me quickly even shift gears.
sure.
I know that you today are responsible for making sure that every kid, every classroom has a teacher.
Yes.
And while it might just come across as, hey, somebody might think I'm responsible for teacher hiring, somebody might say I'm responsible for having humans in the classrooms, the moment you look at it from a perspective that every single student deserves a highly skilled teacher who can bring the best out of them, suddenly the meaning of the role changes. How do you approach this, and what do you think about this? How every teacher is not just a human in the classroom, but has that potential to transform students' lives.
Yeah.
How do you look at that in your role?
In my role, it's funny you mentioned that. We had recently. I think I shared with you prior to our conversation today that we recently just had. I was interviewing yesterday. We had a panel of 13 or 14, if you include me, people interviewing for a special education director. And, as you go through the process and you think, hey, I know this person or I connect with this person or I have worked with them for so long, I don't want to say that doesn't matter because it does. But you always have to kind of go, is this really the person
Yeah,
that is going to provide the best services for our students, in this
yeah,
case in special education?
yeah,
And I think because much of my job, as much as I give good news, a lot of it is bad news.
yeah,
And when I have to deliver that, because I'm a very positive type person, I believe I see the glass as half full and not half empty. I got to make sure when I'm communicating some of these things that aren't always pleasant, that I do it with respect and make sure they understand that the reason is not because I don't think you're good, just there's other people that might have been better for what the students need, and it's it's easy to go off path with that.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we in my job, we're lucky at this district, I should say, that we've got a very good relationship with both of our bargaining units, our classified employee unit and our teachers union. We have, I think, in the end, again, and this is what binds us, the kids' interests at heart.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think for me, it keeps me centered. And I think It is challenging though sometimes because I deal much more with adults than I did with students.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is the thing that keeps you in your center, and it's something you always got to remember. And what you can't go wrong if that's what you're trying to do. You
Absolutely.
might make the wrong decision, but not for the wrong reasons. So I
That's
think that is
good.
a message. And also looking at, I think more importantly, that this district, people see it as we're the district at the district. We're not the district. We make up such a small percent. The district is all the kids and all the students and all the families. That's the district.
Oh,
It,
absolutely.
you know,
Wow.
so those are some of the things that kind of get me out of the house every morning.
And here's an interesting one that while you were sharing, I realized that, while we focus on the kids and we focus on the students,
Hmm.
and you've been in this role for almost, what, 10 years now.
Yeah.
And before that, you've been still in administrative positions
Mhm.
as principal and vice
Sure.
principal. So you've actually seen kids closely for 3 decades.
Hmm.
And if I talk about administrative roles and leadership positions, maybe 1.5 to 2 decades.
Sure.
What has changed when you look at teachers today? I know students have changed. I know
Hmm.
it's not the same perspective for students, but from your current roles perspective, when you look at hiring new teachers and retaining teachers, have the challenges changed over the last 10, 15 years? What are your, top observations that where has it reached today?
Hmm.
And how would you define that change?
Hmm. Um, I mean, the short answer is yes. Teachers have changed. I mean, COVID was certainly there's a before COVID and an after COVID. And I think that's universal.
Yeah.
In education, because we were so in the middle of all that because we deal with people.
Yep.
Um, we're still rebounding from that. I think, going back to a more traditional, I'm the teacher giving you the information. We were moving, I don't want to say we were moving away from it like it wasn't happening, but we were having more opportunities for students to collaborate and work together and
Yep.
move around. And
Yep.
teachers went back because we had to have more straight rows, traditional class size.
Yeah.
And I think some teachers are having a harder time breaking away from that because it's a management kind of thing.
Yeah.
There was sort of a trend where it's sort of a managed chaos in a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it is in any creative endeavor when you can't tell a kid how to learn. They're going to learn. You can just present that information. So I think one of the challenges is that people feeling comfortable again, having a little bit of that fluid environment. I work in a fluid and liquid environment, I could describe it.
Yep.
The other
Yep.
thing I think is kids, because of for those kids that didn't come to school for years or went virtual, it's a little more difficult for their person to person interaction. I think that's been impacted. And
Hmm.
so there's a bit of a disconnect that we're
Yep.
still coming out of,
Right.
and so I think, and of course, technology. I think we spent so much time trying to get these out of kids' hands for the longest period instead of saying, what can we use? How do we use this as a tool, to communicate, to get answers? So I think the technology end of things has been a big game changer.
Got
And
got
it's
it.
hard for some of the more veteran teachers to keep up. And as we have younger teachers coming in, they're a little more adept at it
Yeah.
than some of our veterans. So I think the technology, the post-COVID kind of interactions, and I just think it's so important for people to also try to teach different grades, working in different communities,
Yeah.
going to different schools. I again, reflecting on my own experience in this position, 10 years is a long time to do a single job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, it's important to pull yourself out of your comfort zone whether you're a student or whether you're an educator, because I think that puts wind in your sails and gives you different ways to think about things. So those are some of the things that
Got it.
kind of just come to mind, if that
And
makes
I know,
sense. So,
yeah, oh, absolutely. In fact, that makes so much sense that I've seen educators, students, administration, school leaders who continuously try new things.
mhm.
They end up being more fulfilled and they
Yeah,
end up growing faster than others. And
yeah,
on that, and specifically your role, right? Being responsible for human resources, I know
sure.
you try new things so regularly.
Yeah,
I know, I think you were one of the first few school districts across California who thought of bringing in international teachers.
yeah,
And while many people, many school districts would be initially, they would have apprehensions, they would be scared, they would be thinking how it would happen. I know you've been doing it for years altogether.
sure.
So, so on that, what first made you think about hiring
Mhm.
international teachers?
Sure.
And were there any concerns or fears that you had in your mind? I know I'm going to into uncharted territories here, but I'd love to know that, right? That what made you decide to go for international teachers,
Yeah,
and what were like those unconscious or conscious fears that you might have had when you
sure.
were considering international teachers for the first time?
I mean, to some degree, I had, like you mentioned, we had some teachers here already, and some of our harder to fill content areas, special education, mathematics in particular. So my first experience was more renewing visas. It was pretty low impact.
Okay.
What made us really go out and be more proactive, whether it be working with y'all or even some of the other folks that have reached out, is in California, people have, Bay Area too, particularly because it's a more expensive area to live.
Yeah.
People have been leaving the business. They're
Mhm.
getting into different aspects of the education business, maybe more into curriculum, consulting. Uh, there's more and more virtual work. Like we get a lot from speech pathologists that want to do things virtually. So I think the landscape had changed. There's certainly a need for qualified teachers. And, it's very important to diversify our workforce. Teachers are on, on the average white people. But the point being is we have a community that is much more diverse than those people that teach them.
Yeah.
And I think the importance of having people that look like them, that might have different cultural sensitivities, to understand and connect with our kids so they can feel comfortable to make the risks and be able to learn in a way that perhaps we can't get with an unqualified teacher or somebody that's just off the street. With
Yeah.
teaching, it's very interesting, and I uncovered this many years ago. It was well before I got into this job. There's an it factor to teachers. You can be the most highly skilled, qualified, 10 degrees, but you're not a good teacher. You can, all the information, but you cannot get that information across to a classroom of 12-year-old kids.
Absolutely.
And some of those people end up being professors. It's almost like the professor, so then you get other people who perhaps, and I'll give myself as an example. I did not have my teaching credential when I first got started.
Yeah.
I was able, but I got in there and I connected with people and I put in the time, and I still, even when I stopped teaching, I had a lot to learn. But I never assumed that I was, oh, I've been there and done that. I was, and we call it a lifelong learner in our business. So I think you have to be willing to continue to learn, to change your practices, to try different things. Maybe they work, maybe they don't work. But the minute you're just grabbing each month the same lesson that you do every year, and the papers are getting crumbly and brown, and And
Doesn't.
so when we decided reaching out, there was a need. So is expediency. I needed teachers that were
Yeah,
credentialed, but I also to help diversify our workforce
beautiful.
and to bring to the table people with different perspectives. So I think in that regard, that sort of were some of the reasons that we've been
Yeah,
reaching out, working with yourself and other organizations as well.
got it. And I can share it from my experience that I've met so many school districts across the US now, and there are two kind of education leaders. One who know that they want to go ahead and do things, and one who think a lot. And clearly, you are in Jefferson Elementary, and specifically, your leadership has been go-getter. Go try it, works out great, doesn't work out, we'll learn something new and we'll figure it out the next time, right?
Yes.
So, when you started doing that for international teacher hiring, uh, what were the top things that stood out for you? Good or bad?
Hmm.
uh, earnings or learnings,
Sure.
which came to you that, hey, out of this entire process, these are the top things that we learned, and these are the top things that stood out for us, and they really created a positive impact. What has that been?
Yeah. You know, I think to begin with, of course, when you and I first met,
Yeah,
and having, of course, Bernie as our liaison, that made it right there. There's an immediate trust there.
yeah,
We need to invest in those people that work and educate our students. So, were there financial considerations? Hey, I pay this, I pay that, and we talked about, that's just it's business.
yeah,
But I thought, given the support structures in place that your organization shares, I thought, this is a reasonable investment, so I'm willing to give it a shot. And when I started seeing the caliber of candidates that were coming our way, my confidence in the process um, increased, exponentially. Um, there also, we you just can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over. As I mentioned earlier, the landscape has changed. Less people are getting into education. People that have children cannot afford to live in the San Francisco area or particularly on the peninsula. So how do we also, make, again, you want a good product. Our
yeah,
product, of course, comes out in the form of educated students,
yeah.
but we need people on the assembly line that know how to use their tools.
Yep.
And, we have to look far and wide, just like any business or institution, to get the best candidates that can work with us. And if you can't find them here, I can look across the United States. I get applications from Illinois, New Mexico, but
Yep.
those guys are just thrown in the mail. I knew if I went with one of our organizations, in this case, Suraasa, that once we landed on something, it would move forward. I wouldn't be spending my time just to be told at the end, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And I think those are some of the reasons. You can't just pretend that, hey, I'm going to get that top notch special education teacher, I'm going to get that excellent connected science teacher. You got to look where the people are. And let's be honest, we have a whole world out there of people. Plus, when I look at it, in terms of skills, the folks that we've been working with that are international teachers, English is a primary language of theirs, so that's a strength. So many. I mean, I was looking at recent applications I got from Suraasa regarding science candidates, and I thought, wow, look at these guys.
Yeah.
So I think the level of professionalism, both in the service that we've been getting and ability to reach one another, as well as the quality of the candidates, it makes it a no-brainer, as they call it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And Brent, I know you've been hiring teachers internationally for a very long period of time, and we
Mhm.
started this last year.
Sure.
Uh, have you seen any difference in right from the quality of candidates to the approach that we take to the support from
Mhm.
visa processes, pre-departure for the teacher to when the teacher comes to the classroom? Have you seen any major difference that we've been able to provide or that Suraasa has been able to provide?
Sure. As a matter of fact, yes. Oftentimes, the work we've done with international teachers, the support they get is primarily around the visa process, the
Mhm.
getting them over here. Once that occurs, that's it.
Yeah.
We might call them for questions like, "Oh, hey, can we do this or can we do that?" But really, what's happened is it's ended up being something where they end up with no additional supports.
Yeah.
I mean, with Suraasa, I mean, just of course the accessibility and the ability for the teacher to work with you to ask for supports, or working with Bernie as kind of a liaison, or when some of the folks came up to observe Miriam up at FDR. I have never had that kind of follow up with any of our international teaching partners. So I think that for me is very important, because in the end, I can do what I can do to fill the position, but I also need support from those that can provide content area support. That I mean, I was fortunate enough where we had some housing that we could help with the commute the folks, and you know and of course their children are now in our schools, which is always a bonus too. So I don't think other organizations provide the after, I'll just call it after work begins support that
Yeah.
Suraasa has given. Now, we've been fortunate in with our particular teacher. She's a strong teacher, and we're really happy with her work, and she's meeting our expectations and that of the school. But that's not always the case. It's not always
Sure.
the case. So I definitely see that you guys, or the organization Suraasa, is at a higher level of service than we've had with just dealing with it ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No, it's the
Uh,
truth.
um, and have you heard from other colleagues of the teachers, other colleagues of working with teachers from Suraasa, principal,
Hmm.
other teachers, parents, students, anything that I'm not sure if you would have any or feedback but if you've had any feedback from other stakeholders around our candidates, how has that been?
Sure, sure. Well, I can tell you both, even candidates that were interviewed that we didn't end up hiring, the departments were just so impressed with their qualifications, their professionalism at the school right now with the one candidate or the person that's working with us. Just her eagerness to learn, ask questions, recognizing how different it is teaching in an American public school than it was teaching in a school in Dubai. I think she's really used that to her advantage, and to kind of grow herself. She's only really been in the classroom since February, I believe, is really when she got in. So the feedback I've gotten from her principal is just how successful she's been connecting with her students and families. We were fortunate that we had, in this case, it's because it's a special education teacher. We had the person that was covering the class, who's what's called an inclusion specialist, who helps special education students work in general education classes. That they've really partnered up and paired up well, and the few times I've met with Miriam, and she just seems very happy and comfortable, and I think maybe this is not that we don't get it from other teachers, but she asks good questions.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
she has things, whether it be about housing, whether it be about the schooling for her children, but most importantly about the support she needs as an employee. She's been very good at coming and asking us those questions and feeling comfortable. So I think that's also a good reflection on us, that
Yeah.
that we're approachable
Yeah.
and I think, that that's something moving forward that's going to continue to help her in her work as a teacher. So we're very pleased with how things ended up.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
Um, I'm glad that Mariam and other candidates have stood out for you whenever you've interviewed them. Uh, Now, I know as a fact that many school leaders across the US would love to get advice from somebody like you who has been successful in
mhm.
bringing in international teachers. So, if you do share top two, 3 points with school leaders, what would they
Sure.
be? School leaders who are considering hiring international teachers or might have some concerns or, the initial
Yeah,
jitters, what would your suggestion to them would be?
sure. I think suggestion number one would be to start early in the process. Don't wait until you have no success just to go, oh, I'm going to go for international now. Weave those candidates into your interviews with local teachers as well.
Yeah.
The reason is it's going to take a minute because of the nature of the process to get somebody from wherever they are in the world to in the classroom. Part of that is on the leaving their particular country. Part of it's on coming to our country. So I think start that process early. Get them as part of your interview package. Candidates, because if you want to know that you have other folks out there. I think another thing for folks to consider is to just budget for it. I think some districts, it's certainly reasonable, but there's a financial, component to this. So, in some districts, there might be questions of why are you paying this much money to get somebody from the international? Why not pay us more? Or, I say that, that's those kind of things, pop up. Make sure that your board understands the rationale for reaching out because you want to get the best candidates available, whether they be local or international. So I think making sure that there's no surprises. I would
Yeah.
assume already if you're recruiting and you're a person in my capacity that your superintendent and the superintendent's cabinet is aware of that process. And another thing I'd like to suggest is whoever onboards your certificated employees, that they're aware of the process because there's more work to international candidates than there are domestic candidates. So making sure that you integrate the folks early into your interviews, your board and superintendent are aware of what's going on and that they've signed off on it, and that the people that handle the actual onboarding know what they're getting themselves into. I think those are some of the top things.
Perfect. Perfect. And I have to ask this. Would you recommend, if any school district asks, would you recommend Suraasa to them? Have you been happy with our services?
Absolutely, I've been happy. Absolutely. And, to be totally transparent, part of me is glad I haven't needed as many as, you know, and you want to start slow. For us to go. But now that we've done it, I'm aware of the process. The people that I've mentioned in just moments ago, they're aware of the process. It takes down the apprehension, perhaps, that some people, when you're trying to sell, your teachers. I don't mean to say sell your teachers, but the services. It is what it is. Um, it's not a daunting process, and it's worthwhile. It's a much more worthwhile process than not getting a teacher or getting an underqualified teacher or getting a teacher that's overqualified but not a good fit. Take your time, and if you can get, and again, you've got such an easy approach. It's very easy to communicate with y'all, contact you all. It's not some organizations you just never get a call back. So I felt very good about the process. So good that I'm already looking at some applications for next year.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. We are excited to fill them. And Ben, thank you so much. You've been such a wonderful guest for this show today.
Oh,
I can't,
thank you.
can't tell you how uh, how happy and how warm I feel in my heart right now hearing your thoughts. Um, it takes a lot for us, every single teacher that we take to a school district, we work with them for at least a year, prepare them. Everything that you share, right? Ask them asking questions, them knowing what to do. We put in a lot of hard work behind this because we know that every single child, every single student deserves the best teacher. And just hearing your thoughts where you found all of that value that we really strive hard for, that's been amazing. Any last words from your side for this podcast? Anything as
Sure.
last, and then we'll call it a day here.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, most importantly is that there's good teachers around the world. And, the United States was founded by immigrants. We're an immigration country. We have representatives from around the world. And the more people we can have out here to share their experiences and work with our students and show, us things that we don't know, the better. And, it's very important to look at all the opportunities, like I mentioned, to get good teachers to work with your community. And, Suraasa is an excellent avenue to do that. So I would definitely highly recommend folks to check in with the work they do and to look you up, because I don't believe there's any organization that I've worked with that handles international teachers that provides those services. So, and I say that from the heart.
Thank you so much, Brent. And thank you everybody for listening to our conversation. I'm sure you guys enjoyed, and it's been a wonderful journey. I'll see you soon again with another inspirational leader in the next episode for Inspiring Educators. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day ahead.